everyone, my name is Shauna. In case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. I don't have that much time to film today, so let's see how fast I can do my August 2022 reading wrap up. I read a good number of books this month. I liked some of them, I hated other ones, so it's a little bit of like a mixed bag, but I'm satisfied with the amount of books that I read, and I'm satisfied that I found one new favorite book, and there was like two other books that I enjoyed more than I thought I would. First one that I read was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In case you haven't been following along, I've been rereading the series this year and I've been marking different characters. The character that is marked the most in here is Percy Weasley, and the character that is marked the second most is Lavender Brown. Of course I love this one. This is one of my favorite Harry Potter books and I gave it 5 stars. I believe this was my third time reading this one all the way through. I believe it's third time, but as I've said before, I've listened to bits and pieces of the audiobooks growing up. Like I would check them out from the library and just put in random CDs and listen to it. So I probably technically read it more than that, but I've only read it 3 times, like all the way from start to finish. And then I read A Christmas for Carol by Emily Sharp, and I got this one off of Kindle Unlimited. I've been trying to use my Kindle Unlimited like subscription more because I'm paying for it, so I might as well use it. And the reason why I'm reading this book in August, because it's a Christmas book, is because I was doing a readathon this month for a Goodreads group that I'm in, and the Goodreads group was Garden of Books, and I will link that Goodreads group down in the description below. I tend to do a readathon or like a challenge every month with different Goodreads groups, and I feel like I should talk about that more in my wrap up because that really guides my choices in what I read. And this month there was like 3 different British authors, and I just said like put me in whatever group you want to put me in, and the British author that I got like put in for the group that all the prompts are based off of was Charles Dickens, and Charles Dickens obviously wrote A Christmas Carol, so A Christmas for Carol is a retelling of A Christmas Carol. Unfortunately, my issue for this book was that it just felt like it needed a lot more like substance to it. It felt like it needed a lot more like proofreading, editing, and revising. It felt really short, and I feel like the main gal who's supposed to be like Scrooge just like, I don't know, I didn't feel like it was like realistic. I didn't feel like there was enough reasoning in there why she'd like change and be nice and why all of a sudden she was mean again. It was a little bit of a mess. A Christmas for Carol is about this young gal who is wanting to be a secretary, I believe. I think it's called secretary. She wants to be a secretary, and the only place she can find a secretary job is at Scrooge's company. So it is a interesting premise, but it really lacked in execution. The next book that I read is a reread of my favorite book of all time, and that is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Look at all that colors. I think the only character that I was trying to mark that wasn't in this book was Susan Bonds. And yeah, I went through quite a bit of Flygit, like little packet things. The one that I think I marked the most is either Winky the house elf or Percy Weasley, but Lee Jordan is in here a surprising amount too. And yeah, I also marked Lavender Brown, but she's not in here as much as she is in Prisoner of Azkaban. Of course, I love this one, my favorite Harry Potter book, my favorite book of all time, so I gave it 5 stars. And then I read an arc of Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrane, and it's very exciting to be saying that I also met Alison Cochrane literally yesterday, the day before I filmed this video. I was really excited to read Kiss Her Once for Me because I read The Charm Offensive, and I loved The Charm Offensive so much. Unfortunately, Kiss Her Once for Me wasn't as amazing in my opinion. Kiss Her Once for Me is a holiday sapphic rom-com, and it is about this girl who had this magical day with this other woman, and it was fantastic, but then they had somewhat of a falling out, and the somewhat of a falling out, like the reasoning why is like, well, it's sort of mentioned on the author's website, so it's not that much of a spoiler. It's sort of like miscommunication slash cheating slash they just need to talk it through. But I was a little frustrated with the reasoning why they weren't together. But anyways, fast forward to nearly a year later, and this gal Ellie is working for a coffee shop and she's needing more money, and this hot guy who is the like owner of the building that the coffee shop is in needs someone to fake marry him. So technically legally getting married, but they're not actually in love, so that he can get some inheritance money from his grandparents. And Ellie's like, hey, I need money, I'm gonna do this. And she goes with this guy to his house to the like Christmas gathering of his family to like prove that they're dating and in love, so it seems more real. But when she goes to the house, the guy's sister is the girl that she had that magical day with. So it is an interesting premise. I think that it could have been perfect if things weren't blamed on Ellie as much, and if the reasoning why Ellie and Jack weren't together at the start of the book was like something different. The thing that I think I love the most about this book is the fact that Ellie's anxiety, specifically her social anxiety, is so much like mine, that I felt like so seen and understood. And I told Alison Cochran that when I met her, her anxiety representation in the 2 books that she has out so far, it just feels like it really captures what my experience with anxiety and depression and panic attacks are like. So I really appreciate that part of it. I think people will like Kiss Her Friends for Me, but it just, that main conflict about why Ellie and Jack aren't together at the start of the book is going to be such a turnoff for a ton of people. Also, this is obviously an adult book. There's like spice in there, so yeah. I gave this one 3 stars. I'm sort of torn in between whether I like it or whether I don't like it, and I'm just settling on 3 stars, which to me means it's okay, but I'm leaning on I like it. And then I read a book by an author that I didn't really realize was problematic, and I loved this book called Nyanuki, the Shoshone Girl Who Ran, when I was in elementary school. It was one of my favorite books from elementary school. My 3rd grade teacher had us read it, and I loved it so much. So when I was in the 3rd grade, I picked up another book by this author, and I didn't read it until now, and one of the like prompts for the readathon that I was doing said like historical fiction, and you can reuse prompts, so I read a lot of historical fiction this month. So I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to read this book by the author of Nyanuki. So I read Path Ki Nana, Katuni Girl Solves a Mystery by Kenneth Thomasma. The reason why this author is problematic is because he essentially has made his whole career off of writing about Indigenous people, even though he is white, so he's profiting off of this minority group. And one thing too is Indigenous people have called him out for the way that the characters and stories in his books are very stereotypical for Indigenous people. Oh my gosh, my dog's barking. While my dog is barking, it's the perfect time to tell you I just took my dog to her vet appointment. My dog that I said last month had a kidney infection, and we're waiting on the results of the next blood test, and I will tell you the results when I get them. She lost more weight, which is really bad, but the doctor didn't seem like as concerned, so I'm hoping that that's a good sign. Like, she didn't seem like, oh, we have to immediately do something super urgent, so I'm hoping that's a good sign, but I'm really anxious. So yeah. Oh my gosh, my dog won't stop barking. I don't know what her problem is. Okay, I think my dog's done barking now. Path Ki Nana follows this girl named Path Ki Nana, and she is sent into the mountains for like this tribal custom where she's supposed to find a guardian spirit. So she goes up into the mountains and she witnesses something that sort of puts her life at risk, and it solves a mystery technically that like was going on in her village, but you didn't even know that there's anything weird going on in her village until she gets sent off to find her guardian spirit. My issue with this book was that it's very repetitive. Like, for example, if there was to be a sentence called like she's tired, it would be like she is tired, she needs sleep, tired she is. Like, it felt like it was just repeating the stuff over and over again, using like multiple sentences to describe something that could be described in like 3 words. There was no sort of suspense in here, because at the end of every chapter, like, it would sort of spoil what was coming next. It was really boring, and it sort of felt like the author learned about like what a spirit animal is, or a guardian spirit, and he just like shoved it into the book as much as he could. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Kenneth Thomasma anymore, and I think that he's really problematic, and I'm not going to be reading any more of his books. And yes, this is autographed, and I was super hyped to get an autographed book by him when I was in elementary school. I'll probably keep it because it's autographed, but like, this author's really problematic. If you want to read anything by him, just read Nyanuki and literally don't support anything else by him, okay? Because he's problematic. Next up, I read Mismatch, which is the first book in the No Match for Love series, and this is by Lindsay Armstrong. This is another one that I read for the readathon, and the reason why I read this one is because I had to read a book with a busy city on the cover, and this one has a busy city on the cover. Unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of this book. So Mismatch is about this woman who works at a matchmaking company, and she is working on planning her wedding with her fiance, but her best friend has been in love with her for a really long time, and her best friend decides that he wants to like let her know that he loves her so that she's not making the wrong mistake by ending up with this other guy. So this book was very much just like a man forcing himself onto an engaged woman. And then there was cheating in here, and I was just not a huge fan of the story, and the main guy would like act out and say, oh, it's grief, I'm grieving about my father's death, and I was like, no, you're grieving because you've been in love with this girl since you were literally like a teenager, and you're just like salty that she's not choosing you. So I was getting really frustrated with this book. I didn't really like it. I gave it 2 stars, and this one also was like a book that I downloaded free on the iBook store because I love the cover, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't have downloaded a book because it has a pretty cover. I need to learn my lesson and just stop doing that. Okay, the next one that I read is the start of like 3 books that I read from the same series for historical fiction, so I get more in the readathon. So this book is Dear America, Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie, The Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, and this is by Christina Gregory. It's confusing. I would normally say Christina, but there's an I in there, so it could be Christiana, I think. So I loved the Dear America series as a kid, and I like collected a bunch of the stories, and then I lost interest in them, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna read a bunch of them to fit this like historical fiction prompt to get more points for the readathon and to get them off my shelves if I didn't enjoy them. I sort of enjoyed all 3 of them that I read this month though. So the Dear America series, in case you don't know, is written in like a journal format, and it's always explained why it's written in the journal format like at the start of each book. So this journal is technically a gift from like the main girl's aunt. So this is obviously just the story of this young girl as she is traveling to Oregon on the Oregon Trail. I am very familiar with the Oregon Trail because, well, frankly, I live in Oregon, and I don't know if they do this in other states too. I think it might just be an Oregon thing. We have very extensive Oregon Trail units here in the public school system, and so like we made wagons and we like walked around the neighborhood in like historically accurate outfits, aka I just went to Goodwill and found like a collared shirt and a skirt that looks like it was handmade, so like historically accurate roughly. So like I'm very familiar with the Oregon Trail, and this one was very accurate to what I learned about the Oregon Trail, but it didn't really do much for me. Like, it definitely was interesting in some parts, it definitely felt very accurate, so I think if somebody doesn't know anything about the Oregon Trail, then this will like definitely teach you a lot. But this one wasn't my favorite Dear America book, so I gave it 3 stars. Like, it was enjoyable, but I probably would have like loved it more if I'd read it as a kid, because these books are written in a very like childish like style, but that's purposeful because you're reading from the point of view of a kid in each of these stories, and these are intended for kids. So yeah, this one I gave 3 stars, and I thought it was enjoyable. Not the best Dear America book, but definitely a good one for people who want to learn about the Oregon Trail. And then I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which I surprisingly enjoyed. So I feel like I don't need to summarize what A Christmas Carol is about because everyone knows what it's about. There's been like dozens of movie adaptations about it. So I gave this one 4 stars because I really liked it. And I think the major reason why I liked it is because I loved the audiobook. I was listening to the like Audible version that came out a few years back. That Audible version is dramatized. That word I feel like I didn't say right. There's like music in there, there's a full cast, there's like different sound effects used, and I really liked that. And it had 2 actresses who I really liked in it, which is the reason why I decided to listen to the Audible version as opposed to just reading it on my phone. So it had Miriam Margulies, who plays Professor Sprout in the Harry Potter series, and she played the ghost of Christmas Present, and she did such a great job. And the other one that's in there is Jenna Coleman, and Jenna Coleman is most known for playing Clara Oswald in Doctor Who, obviously. So yeah, if you want to read A Christmas Carol, I highly recommend listening to the full cast Audible version. I have like a picture of it somewhere on the screen. Look for like that cover on Audible. It is phenomenal. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 though, because there was some parts where I was a little less interested, but it was still really enjoyable, okay? I still really liked it. 4 stars to me is still like, I want people to read it, okay? So like 5 stars, I need everyone to read it. 4 stars, I want everyone to read it. 3 stars, you can make your own decision about whether you want to read it or not. Does that make sense? I hope my rating system and whether I like recommend it or not makes sense. The next book I read is Standing in the Light, The Captive Diary of Catherine Carey Logan. So this is by Mary Pope Osborne. This is another one in the Dear America series. I enjoyed this one less than Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie. And I was having like a sense of deja vu when I was reading this, and I figured out the reason why I was having a sense of deja vu is because this is essentially the story of Mary Jemison, who I read a book about her earlier this year, but it has a different ending. And I was reading in the back that Mary Pope Osborne, who, in case she sounds familiar, she wrote the Magic Tree House series. Mary Pope Osborne likes Indian captive stories, well, Native American captive stories, but she called it Indian captive stories. So like, since she likes those type of stories, I'm sure she has read about Mary Jemison, who was a real person, and I'm sure that this story was roughly inspired by Mary Jemison's story, because Mary Jemison is very popular for her story of how she was captured and how she fell in love with the Native American group that captured her. So if you're familiar with Mary Jemison's story, then skip this one. If you aren't, you can give it a try, but I wasn't a super duper huge fan of this one. I gave it 3 stars. This one is about this girl named Catherine, and Catherine was captured by this tribe, and there's like a reason why, okay? And she sort of like starts to feel sympathetic towards her tribe, and she starts to fall in love, and It's interesting because it seems awful to be captured, but when they get captured, some of the people, just in history too, like this isn't just a one-off thing that has happened to just like 1 or 2 people, but some of the people who got captured would realize, oh, these Native American tribes that I was so hateful towards when I wasn't captured are actually fairly nice. So it's a little bit of a controversial story because of that, and I think like it's definitely intense for some kids, but I thought that this was interesting. Just it was the same story with Mary Jemison, so I'd already basically read the same story earlier this year. And the story also deals with Quakers a lot, which I didn't know much about, so that is the part of the story where I learned the most. Quakers. I knew nothing about them until I read this book. And then I read another Dear America book. I read Early Sunday Morning, The Pearl Harbor Diary of Amber Billows. This one's really short, but this is the one that I enjoyed the most out of all the Dear America books that I read this year. Let me look up the author of this one, Barry Denenberg. So the reason why I enjoy this one so much is because I feel like, at least in my history classes, I don't know if it's the same way in like the whole US education system, Pearl Harbor was really like brushed over. Like we didn't cover it. We only focused on Hitler and the Nazis. So this one really like filled in the gaps about something that I didn't know that much about in World War II. I thought it was very descriptive. I was really emotional reading this. I thought that this is one of the better Dear America books. The only issue with this book, in my opinion, is that it is too intense for kids to read. You are reading it as if you were on Hawaii near Pearl Harbor when it is being bombed, and there's like graphic descriptions of people dying, of injuries, so I thought that was a little too intense for kids. So I'm actually glad that I waited until I was an adult to read this book. However, I still did really enjoy it, so I give it 4 stars. I do wish it was longer, but the reason why it's so short is because the concept behind why she keeps diaries is essentially that she keeps a different diary for each place that she lives at, and she lived at Hawaii the shortest amount of time, so her diary is pretty short for Hawaii. And this also went into a lot about something that I didn't know. I didn't really know about what the US's thoughts and like Americans' thoughts on World War II were before they joined the war. I wasn't super familiar with that. It makes me a little sick too though, like that there were so many Americans that didn't want to join World War II despite the fact that like Hitler and the Nazis were doing like terrible things. But yeah, this was really interesting and really informative, and I really learned a lot from it. I really gotta hurry up my filming because I really gotta go do something soon. Next up, I read Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Osman. I didn't enjoy this one as much as the previous 3 volumes. This one was very triggering for me personally. It dealt with a lot of triggers and things that were very hard for me to read about, and there was a massive issue with this book, which is that Charlie in this book supposedly has anorexia, but if you look at his symptoms, he doesn't actually have anorexia. He has a different eating disorder called ARFID, which is Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. I don't think Alice Osman wrote it as anorexia in order to like harm anyone, but I definitely think she could have and should have done more research about how anorexia actually looks as compared to other eating disorders. Basically with ARFID, you're restricting your food intake, but it's not because of body image issues, and Charlie doesn't have any body image issues, yet he is restricting his food, and everything that he used to describe his eating disorder was textbook ARFID definition. So he definitely has ARFID and not anorexia, and I would hate for people to read this book and think that they have anorexia when in fact it's ARFID. So basically, if you are limiting your food and you have body image issues, it's anorexia. If you're limiting your food, you don't have body image issues, and you're not forcing yourself to puke, and you're not over exercising, then it is ARFID, okay? Yeah, I still enjoyed this one. I would still recommend it, but it's definitely not this like lighthearted fun story that like the previous 3 were. And then I finished this month off with another graphic novel, and this one was a Gretzko, Little Ray of Sunshine. This is by Brenda Hickey. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 stars. A Gretzko is about this red panda, and she works in an office, but when she's not working in the office, like after her workday gets done, she is a karaoke queen, and she has so many relatable things that she goes through, and I just love Gretzko so much. So it's my second Gretzko graphic novel. They definitely feel like additional episodes to the show, which is something that I really appreciate it, because I really hate when I read a story that is like based off of a TV show and it feels like I'm reading something completely different. But this definitely feels like just an additional episode to the show. This one sort of deals a little bit with like problematic celebrities, which I thought was cool. I thought was a very relevant topic. So those were all the books I read this month. In case you can't tell, my favorites were A Gretzko, Little Ray of Sunshine, and the 2 Harry Potter books I read this month. I hope that all of you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me if you haven't already. I upload videos twice a week, so my next video will be uploaded this Friday. I hope you all stick around to watch that one, and until next time, goodbye!